All right, welcome everybody. This is Anchors for Climbing. So there should be there. I just tested it and it's on. So we're testing to make sure we have sound. All right, good. So we're broadcasting live from Bobcats Outdoor, and I always want to say I have a studio audience here. Live studio audience. Woo-hoo! Yeah. So, right. So our plan tonight is to give everybody this presentation, which is somewhat brief, to give you an overview of what is involved with Anchors for Climbing, and then we're going to turn the presentation off. We'll readjust the camera, and we'll work on actually showing you what we're going to do here on the table. So, all right. So go ahead. Let's go to the first slide. One thing we need to talk about is what sorts of materials you might use for rock climbing. So I brought a few things tonight to show you. Of course, in the store here, we've got all kinds of ropes that are new. I just brought a hunk of dynamic climbing rope to show you tonight. So this is the sort of rope we use in rock climbing. It's built dynamically, which means that it'll stretch under load and absorb the force of a fall. And it's got a core in the middle. It's made out of nylon, and then a sheath on the outside that protects it from abrasion. And this one is about a 9.6 millimeter, I'd say, and it's a hunk of rope that we have left over. So we use that for our anchor tonight. This is the typical size. And we also have other sizes of ropes and diameters. This one is a 7.7 millimeter rope, still the same construction. So you can see that there's quite a difference in size. We use these for different reasons. This would be for a route in which we didn't need as much protection against a fall, or we were using it in connection with another rope. And this would be a rope that we used for standard rock climbing. So that's ropes. There's also this thing called cordage. And someone asked me the other day, what's the difference between cordage and ropes? And one of the differences is that cordage is static, which means that it doesn't stretch under load. And its construction is different. It's very strong. So here's an example of what we use called cordelette. So this is a 6 to 7 millimeter loop of cord. It's between 15 and 20 feet. It's about this big, okay? And it's tied with a double grapevine or fisherman's knot, okay? So I'll use that tonight to show you how to build anchors. We also use what's called webbing. There's two types of webbing. This type is nylon. It's cheap. You can buy it in bulk. And it's tied in a water knot, and then the end's taped. What's great about this stuff is that you can cut it up or leave it as rappel anchors, and because it's not too expensive, you don't get too worried about it. One of the things about it, though, is that it soaks up water. So in the mountains, it's going to get heavy, and if it gets frozen, then that's an issue. But I use this stuff to create wrap anchors and cheap slings, because you can cut it to whatever length you want. You can tie it with a knot that's called a water knot. This is a water knot, okay? Two ends and an overhand that are rethreaded. I have a little bunch of it here. I'm going to show you in my pack. Often when we climb in the mountains, I use this stuff just in a big bunch like this. So if I have to sling a boulder or I have to build an anchor, I don't have the right materials, I miscalculated on the lead, then I've always got this, and I also carry a knife so I can cut this out. So as far as how strong all this stuff is, many thousands of pounds. We use a metric called a kilonewton, which is 220 pounds of dynamic force. So a body that's, or an object of any certain mass that's moving, 220 kilonewtons, or 220 pounds is 1 kilonewton. So these can, withstand 20 to 30 kilonewtons of force. So they're definitely strong. So we've got ropes, cordage, slings, and webbing. And I'm going to show you that there's different types of webbing beyond nylon. the type that we probably use the most is just a simple Kevlar Spectra blend. And one of the most common sizes is what's called a double. So that's this. It's 4 feet long. It can be halved, so it's the size of a single. Okay. We also use more expensive, thinner Spectra type cord, or excuse me, webbing. And so this would be a single size, 2 feet. This one's the most expensive, the lightest weight. So this would be for like alpine climbing. Because Spectra doesn't soak up water like nylon, although it costs 2 or 3 times as much, it's a really good sling material to have. And it's too slippery to be tied, so it has to be sewn, which is why they only sell it like this. So these are your options. You can do single, you can do double, you can do nylon, you can do, you know, cheap Spectra or Kevlar or mixes of any of those. They're all good. They have different advantages and disadvantages. There's another type of cord that we use that's not in a cordelette, and that would be a piece of cord for a prusik. So that would be a little piece about like this, maybe 5 millimeters or so. And we tie that again with the same knot, double grapevine fisherman's. Okay. So those are the different types that we use. Then lastly would be carabiners. So this is a locking carabiner with a manual gate, a really big one. This carabiner would be a little bit smaller and more useful, not quite as heavy. And then we have a more compact carabiner like this, which would be even smaller but less easy to manipulate with gloves. So this is small, this is normal, this is large. They're all useful in certain ways. This is probably the most general size that you'd want. Then we have the same sort of thing going on with non-locking carabiners. So this is a wire gate carabiner. This is a standard size. They also come in very small sizes, like this, which are certainly very light, but really hard, again, to manipulate with gloves or when it's cold, or when there's a lot of gear that has to be clipped through it. So the size that I recommend is this size here. Okay, so that was real brief through materials. Let's go on to the next one. So we're going to look at a couple knots tonight. I'm going to use this rope to show you how to tie a couple knots, and I'll give you guys some knot tying materials too. And you guys online, you're just going to have to find your own rope. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So let me give you some rope to work with. There we go. And how about you guys pass these out over here? There's little ropes in there. We have a question in the audience.
Actually, not a question, but I know how to tie this knot.
You know how to tie this knot?
Yes.
All right. Great. Well, hopefully other folks do too. This is an anchors seminar tonight, but I do think it's important that we go through a couple knots, because when can you not use more practice in knots, right? So the one that we want to look at first, of course, is the good old tie-in knot, which is figure 8, and we'll turn this to a figure 8 on a bite. So to tie this knot, I would pull a bite out like this, okay? Go around once, okay? And continue over, instead of going into the loop straight off, continue around the back and come in once you've completely encircled the rope strand, making this sort of a knot. So this is a figure 8. In order for you to have enough tail to make it the tie-in knot, you want to go out probably to your other shoulder. That would give you plenty of tail to work with, okay? So that's the figure 8. Now to complete the figure 8 on a bite, which is also the same as the figure 8 follow through, we do the same procedure, only we do it with the rope doubled over. That's what a bite is, a B-I-G-H-T. So you'd form a loop. And then instead of going straight in, that would create an overhand in a bite. You would go around one more time, or to complete all the way around the strand, and this is a figure 8 on a bite. It's identical to a figure 8 follow through, which we'll do here in a minute. I'll have to get a harness on and all that stuff. But if I were to unthread this, okay, it would be the same knot as the figure 8 follow through undone, which is the knot we use for tying in. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so the Munter hitch, this one is important for in place of a belay device. I'll show you how to tie it. I'm going to need to have my pal here in the front be a climber. You want to just hold on to that end? You can come on into the camera, that's all right. Okay, right here, that's good. So he and I are climbing partners. I'm going to put the rope through the carabiner, and then I'm going to take the non-load side, okay? I'm going to form a loop in it like this, okay? And then I'm going to flip it and clip it into the carabiner and pull it tight. So if he's coming up the route, then I can belay him, and if he needs to descend the route, then it creates friction that way too. So it flips over. So we can belay on the way up, we can lower with friction on the way down. So it's a replacement for a belay device. You did a good job, thank you. All right, so that's the Munter hitch. Do you guys want a carabiner? Can you practice it? Or okay, I'll give you a couple carabiners real quick. You might need it for some of the other knots. Throw a couple of those out there. Okay, all right, so that's a pretty fancy knot. Let's go to the next one. So more carabiner usage. And this knot is the clove hitch. This is the knot that we use for tying in when we're climbing. So I think to save some time, I'll just go ahead and tie myself into my belt real quick so I can show you what this looks like. Why are we going over these? Because these are all ways that anchors are utilized. And this one is important because when you come to an anchor you need to tie in, you use the rope most often, okay? So if this is my anchor point and I come up to it, I've just finished climbing up to the anchor, the first thing I do is I clip the rope through just like I did on the Munter hitch. Then what I do is I grab the rope on the opposite side and I bring it to the front and then flip it, okay? It creates a kind of a pretzel, okay? And let's try that again so you guys can see what I'm doing here, okay? Bring it to the front, okay? Flip it like this. That's the knot. Let's do it a couple times, okay? You clip it through, grab the knot from the back side, bring it to the front, and flip it like this. Okay, can you see that flip? Yeah, go ahead and grab a carabiner. Flip it like this, clip it through. If you did it right, what you'll end up with is your strand next to the spine, and it should tighten up. And then as I'm connected to this anchor, let's say I want to adjust my position. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to feed it through from the slack side and then pull it out on my side so I can adjust my position between myself and the anchor. Or let's say that I want to get closer to the anchor. I can pull it in on my side of the rope and then pull out the slack on the other side of the rope. So I can remain tied in but adjust my distance between myself and the anchor. That's why that knot is important. So all of these knots we practice in our training courses with a lot more time than I'm giving you tonight. So I'm just reviewing them. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so we'll use those as our anchors for tonight, as our knots for tonight, and we'll start talking about anchors. So as we look through what's available out there, one of the obvious places to start with is natural anchors. So that's trees, rocks, boulders, horns, all of these items. There's a difference between a tree and a bush. What do you think it is? Got any ideas?
More bulk.
Size, height, okay. So a tree is going to be at least 5 feet tall, and it should be this big around, okay. So anything that's that big around, at least 5 feet tall and alive, 5'5" and alive, we consider that to be an adequate anchor for a single piece. Anything smaller than that, we'll call it a bush, even if it's a tree that's stunted. And bushes alone are not enough. You can link bushes together, but you shouldn't count on it as a single component of an anchor. Okay, maybe 4 or 5 bushes together would be counted as a single component of an anchor in connection with other things, but bushes are not good enough. Then in rocks, we've got a horn, okay, which is shaped like this, okay. Then a boulder, which would be a detached piece of rock that's laying on the land, okay. It can be of any particular size, but I think that it's probably going to need to be too big for you to put your arms around for it to be large enough to even think about using a horn anchor. There's also many other things to consider, like the angle that it's on and what sort of bedding surface is attached to. Then there's the pinch. So a pinch is where 2 pieces of rock come together. So if I had 2 pieces of rock come together, then I could encircle that with a piece of webbing or a cord. And so that would be a way that I could keep myself on the mountain. And then there's a flake. So a flake would be, you have a wall, and then you have a piece of the wall that's peeling off. That happens a lot in granite, okay? So you could put your protection behind the flake, or better yet, you could put webbing behind the flake and sling it. You have to pay attention to whether the flake is going to stay on the wall if it's weighted, like how detached is the flake, okay? That's important. It needs to be more attached than unattached, of course. Then this is a chalk stone, which is a rock that's wedged into a chimney or some sort of a crack. So those can be slung too. As you look for these features out there, they're all out there. They just take a little ingenuity to pick up and find. And then this is a rock climbing anchors, but my PowerPoint slideshow includes snow. So believe it or not, there's things you can do in snow too. For anchoring, we won't discuss those. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so as far as artificial anchors go, I think what I'll do is we have all of those laid out here. I'll pull them off the table, and we'll hold them up in front of the camera and in front of you guys one at a time. So there's really 2 categories. There's passive and active. Does anybody know the difference between these 2? What does that mean, passive and active?
One's movable.
One is moving. Which?
The active.
Right, okay. Well, we'll start with the less exciting ones, the passive anchor skills. So all of this stuff is taught in, we spend a whole day going over this in our rock training program, which is 2.1. We're teaching it actually next Saturday. So if there's spots available. So if you guys are interested, we can accommodate you. But just briefly, so the first thing we probably would start with is stoppers or nuts. So these are aluminum wedges that are slung on wires, and they come from many sizes like this all the way up to this, and their main thing is slotting. Okay, so later on I'll show you how they're slotted correctly. They're really mostly only good for a downward pull, but they're cheap, and they can do a good job if you know the art and craft of placing them and weighting them to make sure that they're reliable. Another type of passive protection is hexes. So these are also kind of an older style protection. They're somewhat ingenious because the way that they're designed, they have, like nuts, they have many different placement options. So one way they can be placed is like this. Another way they can be placed is like this. And another way they can be placed is like this. And these 3 configurations all have different widths. So if you find a particular crack, there's a good chance that a few of these will fit in that crack if you place them in different directions. So hexes. Then there's one that's kind of a crossover between active and passive that most folks either hate or love. I'm on the love side, and that would be for tricams. They're a really irregularly shaped pointy stopper that you can put in a crack like this. But one thing that they have that's going for them is they have this pivot point here, and they will roll back on their rails, and then when they're placed in the crack, okay, you can see that when they're weighted, this fulcrum will actually cam and lock itself into the crack. It has to be done correctly, and they're difficult to get out, which is one reason you see a lot of them scattered around if people don't like them, because they can't get them out of the crack. They do their job, they stay, right? So this is a semi-active piece of protection that could replace a cam and is useful in quite a few places. So now we go to We have nuts, hexes, tricams, ice screws, axes, pickets, and deadmen. These are all things that apply to the snow world. Active protection. Does anybody know for the win what SLCD stands for? Spring-loaded camming device. All right, so pull up a couple of them here. So they come in all sizes, colors, and makes. Here's some of the smallest. This is a New Wave single stem 4-lobe mini micro cam here. This one happens to be the Black Diamond X. What are they called? The X4s. The X4s. This is a 0.1 X4. Tiny, tiny. I didn't grab the biggest that they have out there, but this is one of the bigger ones. This is a 3-stage Omega Pacific link cam. One cam and another cam inside of it, and another cam inside of it. Then there's some others, various sizes and configurations. This is a double axle 4-lobe Black Diamond Camelot. And I think that's about all the different sizes I'll show you for now. So we'll talk about how to place these, why they're useful in a little bit. There's also pitons and bolts. I'm not going to cover those tonight, but there is protection that is still used out there that is a part of the history of climbing. You pound in with a hammer, so that would be a piton. And then there's fixed protection, which is put in with a drill and then glued or affixed in place, and that's a bolt. So we use those in sport climbing or places where there's no anchors or we need anchors. So let's go on to the next. So as we start talking about anchors, one of the first things we need to think about is when are they used, why are they used? And when you start climbing, you're just moving on the rock, so you don't really need an anchor at that point. But the climbing is going to get harder or more exposed. And at some point, you've got to start thinking about what are the consequences of a slip or a fall at this point. So there's a couple steps between soloing rock and full-on aid climbing like you might do if you were ascending El Cap, where you would be sleeping on the wall and hammering in things and using little pieces of protection to climb up on. The 2 stages in between that are simul climbing or using a running belay and pitched climbing. So the 4 different stages are here. The first one, simul soloing, is just people all climbing together with no ropes, no protection, nothing. That would be also called scrambling. If it got really high angle and 5th class, then you would be free soloing. Let's say you were climbing, the north face of Half Dome. Okay, that would be free soloing, not scrambling anymore, though it looks the same because it has no protection. At some point, most people will start using a rope, so at that point, they'll be simul climbing. Okay, they'll have a rope between the 2 of them, and the lead climber, as he's going along, will place protection at a certain point. That protection will stay in place on the mountain. The rope will move through. The second or the third, in their turn, will come up to that piece of protection and will either clip past it or pull it out. So the whole team moves in concert. There isn't a leader going out and then a follower leapfrogging behind them. That would be part 3, which is belay climbing. You have established belay. The leader goes to a spot where they set up another anchor and then bring up the rest of their team. And that continues, pitch after pitch. And then the last one is fixed rope or aid climbing, where the rope is fixed directly to the mountain, and we're either climbing on the rope itself or climbing the gear, okay, that's on the mountain. So that's not actually rock climbing, that's climbing the gear that's on the mountain. So aid climbing. So how those look, if you put them together, go ahead to the next one, it's like this. At one end is less security or more security, and the other end is less speed or more speed. So as you increase on either of these, okay, you have to make a choice. If you want to go really fast, you're going to have less security. That's soloing. If you want to go, if you're okay with going a little slower but being safer, that's a running belay. If you're okay with moving at some moderate pace and having more security to protect against the unforeseen, that's belayed climbing, which is this normal type. And the slowest of all, but in some ways the most secure, would be physically attached to the mountain at all times. Okay, so this is just a general continuum, so you can see we're going to move up and down this depending on our need for speed against our need for security. So anchors show up right here, okay? And they're used at all three of these upper stages. There's two types. There's a single point anchor, and then there's multi-point anchors. So I'll go through both of those. Single point anchors, for each of these there's about 4 things you think about. One is, where is the anchor going to be? So you have to find a location where it can be placed pretty simply. Secondly, what type of anchor should be placed here? Is it natural? Is it artificial? Is it fixed? Okay. And then the configuration, how should it be arranged in relation to the climbing? And then the assessment, you can't just stick it in there and say, yeah, that's good. You have to take a look at it, make sure that it's going to meet your needs, it's in sound rock, the device is placed correctly and the proper orientation, considering the direction of load and other factors like that. So if we go to multi-point anchors, the same things come into play, only now we're talking about multiple pieces. So that's what we're going to get to in a minute here. So we need to find a place where we can put in multiple singles and then connect those all together in a network to create a much stronger climbing anchor. That would be for the belay. And then that's why selection is really important, because we want to make sure that they're in some sort of a arrangement that allows us to connect them all together. We can't have them really spread apart, nor is it a very good idea to have them all concentrated on one single feature like a single flake. And then how should they be strung together? Should we use the climbing rope? Should we use webbing? Should we use cordelettes or hybrid of any of these? Should they all come together at the master point, or should there be one that's protected against an upward pull? So many options. Then lastly, again, we do want to make sure that whatever we put together, that we make sure that everything is safe, all the gates are locked, we took into account the load that would come on it. And so that's what we're going to get to eventually. All right, so now I think we'll just look at some visuals, and then we'll turn off the slideshow, and we'll go to the real hands-on demo, and you guys can help me out. So when we get multiple pieces together, for this demo, we're just going to use 2, okay? One of the big things that we think about is whether we want the anchor to be dynamically or statically equalizing, okay? So what do I mean by that? Well, it's important that however strong these 2 anchors are, that when something is pulled on them, they're each going to share the load, okay? And if we build an anchor that's dynamically equalizing, no matter where this master point goes, it's going to share the load between those 2 pieces. So if this master point swings right or left, then these are both going to take the most that they can without blowing out. It's not going to be an unequal distribution. The problem with this anchor is that if one of these blows, there'll be an extension. And I'll show you this in real time here in a second. So sometimes we tie load limiting knots in these to safeguard against extension. Let's go to the next one, which is static equalization. And that would be to connect your pieces with a figure 8 on a bite, okay? So that one is definitely protected against elongation, against shock loading. But should the master point shift left or right, then you can see that there will be a gap that will be created, and that the load will shift primarily to the pieces on that side, and some of the pieces won't be weighted at all. So you'll lose them in the equation. So can you go back to the first one? So dynamic, self-equalizing, but potential for shock loading. Let's go to the second one. Static is not self-equalizing. It's equalized, but isn't dynamically equalizing. But it certainly protects against shock loading, 100%. So that's the the decision that we have to make. Let's go on to the next one. Should be getting to the end here. So when we build the anchors, we can use some little acronyms to decide whether they're good enough. So these are both used in the rock climbing world equally. Probably because this one's shorter, I think it has a little bit of an edge over earnest. So serene is the anchor strong? Redundant means does it have more than one recourse if a portion of it fails? Is there more than one pieces that are keeping it strong? Equalized is what we just discussed, that the load is shared between all the pieces and that there's no extension. Same thing applies to earnest, they're just a different order. Is it equalized? There's an extra A here for applicable, so sometimes the anchor that you're building is overdone, or perhaps it's not enough for the forces that you're going to encounter. And then redundancy, same thing again, no extension, strong, and then timely. Again, you want to choose the best system for what you need. If you're doing a running belay, you might not need a super bomber 3-piece anchor. You might just need a 2-piece, or maybe you're just going to continue with setting in single point anchors and climbing through it. So those are the acronyms that we'll use to look at it. Okay, should be getting to the back here. Okay, so we're going to ask questions like, do I need to protect against an upward force? What's the angle going to be like? How long should I extend it so that it doesn't increase the load on the pieces? And how can I do this using the least amount of gear and efficiently? There's different choices you need to make about where the belay should be positioned, what belay method you're going to use, and actually what carabiners and pieces you're going to put into it. So we'll think about some of that. I think that should be about it. Here's some places you can go to. Here's our website, sierramountaineergroup.org. It's also smc.club. And then there's some animated knots online you can use. I've got a couple books I'm going to show you guys real quick that I recommend for this sort of stuff. This one is an older one, Knots and Ropes for Climbers by Dwayne Raleigh. It was illustrated by Mike Cleland, the same guy who's done a lot of great illustrations for climbing. I also found this one to be pretty good by Clyde Souls, the Outdoor Knots book. So, and then as far as climbing anchors go, yes, I have an antiquated copy, but John Long's put out a couple versions of this. This is Climbing Anchors by John Long. There are some thicker books that are more comprehensive, but get a book like this. I find that they're really useful because they have pictures and diagrams so that you can see and compare and assess how people are building anchors. Just as a really good comprehensive book, this one is really fine. I find this one to be useful. It's Rock Climbing, Mastering Basic Skills. Okay, and then lastly, how could we not forget Mountaineering, Freedom of the Hills, 8th edition. This is a good one for anchoring too. All right, so with all that being said, let's go ahead and go to the last slide. Thanks for that presentation part. Now we're going to